Welcome back to the Show My Scars podcast. I'm your host, Derek Duker. Today I'll be speaking with Noble Bowman, a business coach out of Springfield, Missouri. He owns the business Noble Business Strategies. You'll hear about how we met in the conversation that we have here in a few moments. But the memory I have with Noble that will stay with me forever, and the reason I brought him on this podcast was a time that we met up at a local coffee and tea shop here in Springfield, and we had a conversation about pivotal moments following a setback. We'll bring up that piece of advice that he gave me in the conversation, so don't worry about that. But in remembering that time in my life and remembering the conversation that I had with Noble, I was reminded how many people I have noticed in my personal life that are also suffering from burnout or on the verge of it. And that also reminds me that there are multiple ways on the path to burnout. It doesn't matter if your job pays you well and management treats you well. That doesn't protect you from burnout. For example, for me, it was not attaining life goals and not forgiving myself for being unable to reach them due to circumstances outside of my control. What I am able to control is my response to that situation, and I use response intentionally instead of react, because a reaction happens in the moment and it happens under the surface, and it's usually our nervous system in full control in that situation. What is vital in that moment is putting some time between that reaction and your choice of response. And Noble and I talk about how to come up with that response in the episode. Another avenue to get to burnout that I want to talk about, and one that kind of crushes me inside when I see it happening to somebody, is if your work isn't challenging you enough, or it isn't aligned with your purpose, that's putting you at major risk of burnout. Just a little tip from personal experience. When I first got back to the Springfield area, I had to take several awful jobs to get back on my feet. At each stop, I forced myself to find something about that job that would help prepare me for when I went out on my own. I always knew I wanted to do that. I once had a job selling DirecTV and AT&T internet. I didn't even want to accept the job when I first found out what I had actually applied for. It didn't match up with the job title. But I knew I'd need to be able to sell someone on the idea of my business. I need to ask them to advertise, fund, or even join my business. So I bought a couple books on the subject and actually had some success in that job. My work over at Two Oddballs taught me a lot, both in what I did and what I watched the owners do. That kept me going for a while, but in the last few years, I knew I had all the education that I needed, and what was left was to jump. If that sounds like you, like you're getting tired of what you're doing and you just don't know what the heck you want to get out there and do, we talk a little bit about this, but I don't think we landed on the advice I wanted to give, which is how to identify your purpose. And there's a lot of advice out there. And I started to explain how I did this, but essentially it takes some alone time. I meditated on this thought a lot. I would clear my mind and just let my mind wander. And I would search up some tips on mind wandering during meditation, but really just analyzing the thoughts that come in and then disappear. What I watch for, and this is just for me, hopefully it resonates with somebody else, but it's those ones that initially spark joy, but are quickly followed with some sort of doubt. It's usually a sign that that's something you should pay attention to, because you'll hear me bring up a couple of stories in this conversation about this. That fear will never go away. There's a song I like, and it says, the greatest things live on the opposite side of fear. And there's a lot of quotes about fear and purpose and how they intertwine, but for me, it was looking back at my childhood and seeing what it was that I wanted to do then and what I actually had fun doing. And I took the monetary thing out of the situation. And of course, that's well-known advice right there, but it really boiled down to what do I enjoy? And that's not to say that everybody's dream job is going to be something that's fun to do, but there has to be some aspect of it that brings you joy or happiness or a sense of fulfillment. Anyway, this conversation with Noble has some good bits of info that not only will help you keep your head on straight in your career life, I think some of it could be altered just a tick and apply to other areas of life as well. We'll talk about keeping positive momentum following a setback, the importance of finding your passion before starting a business, thinking about how your business impacts people, managing stress, and how to find and acquire outside sources of perspective. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with Noble Bowman. Thanks again for agreeing to do this. For those listening that don't know, what's it been now?
It's been about 3 years.
Yeah,
3-4 years.
Yeah, I worked. I do some of Noble's social media stuff through the Two Oddballs company that I reference a lot on the show. And you're their business coach.
Yep.
And how did you wind up meeting the Oddballs?
I think I bumped into them at a networking event out in Stratford, Missouri. And we just connected, said hello. And I reached out to Gabriel because I was looking for a marketing company that I could refer my clients to. And Gabriel agreed to meet with me. And I didn't realize that when he agreed to meet with me, he was really trying to see if I would fit for them as a business coach. And so it ended up turning out to be a pretty good a meeting for both of us. And we were able to work out an agreement and start doing some work together.
Yeah. And you have kind of an interesting background. Why don't you go through that a little bit, kind of how, like what you first started doing professionally and how you wound up becoming a business coach?
Sure. It's been a journey. When I was really young, I was raised in the home of a pastor. My dad was a pastor of a church, and early part of my life, I felt like that was my direction in life. Went to a Bible college for a while and came back to university and ended up spending many years involved in some level of ministry, a bulk of that time on college campuses with university students, which was a lot of fun. And then I moved to Springfield, was doing the college campus ministry thing, went on staff at a church, was there for a couple years, and left and went to work for a large privately owned marketing company, one of the largest in the country that was privately owned at the time, and worked for them for a couple years. And then just kind of spent some time trying to figure out what to do. I was kind of a stay-at-home dad for a little while with my boys. My wife had a great job, and I was trying to figure out what to do. And then I taught myself how to do architectural design, and went to work for a company called Classic Rock Coffee, which is a coffee company. And I have designed stores that are in Dubai and Bangladesh and Jordan and India and all over. Spent doing that several years and working in their corporate office. And a buddy of mine came and said, "Hey, bro, you should really consider being a business coach." It's something I'd thought about, but I just really didn't know what it looked like. And what I realized is that some of the same skills that I used in the ministry side and just the development side of this organization, it's the same skills that I needed as a business coach. I just needed a different toolbox, different tools to play with, and was able to get connected with a group of guys that taught me, invested in me, and mentored me through the first few years. And here we are now, 6 years later.
Yeah. How'd you decide whenever you came to that realization, I want to give business coaching a try? How did you decide where you got your coaching and how to use those tools to help?
Fortunately, the buddy that recommended it to me worked with a group of a company out of Canada, out of Ottawa, Canada, called Rhapsody Strategies, and they were really big business coaching group in the Ottawa area. And so I went to work for them as a subcontractor, basically, and spent 2 years with them investing in me. And, it was a revenue share that probably benefited them as much as it did me. But in the long run, I learned a whole lot during those first 2 years of the tools that I needed and the approaches that I needed to become a better coach.
Mm. And how was the early goings of being a business coach?
It was the tough. It's business coaching is one of those things that like any business today, they say that the average business, I think it's 60 to 80%, depending on which numbers you look at. 68% of small businesses close within 2 years. The number's even higher for people that become business coaches. It's a tough world, and you have to earn trust because just about anybody, there's nothing out there that there are licensing agencies, but nothing requires that. So anybody can throw up a shingle, so to speak, and say, I'm a business coach. And so it takes time to build the respect of people to trust you. Early on, I struggled with who in the heck's going to trust a guy that was a pastor to be a business coach. But then I realized, when you get down to it, business coaching is helping people set goals and then helping hold them accountable to those goals. It's life coaching for a business.
Yeah.
And so it's, like I said a while ago, it's a lot of the same skill set, just finding a different toolbox.
I remember whenever Gabe and Kylie was telling me, hey, we've got a new client that we want to put you on to do some of the content. And they told me that you were a business coach. Mm-hmm. And they literally prefaced it, like he's one of the good ones, because I don't know how, but they can always tell like when when I'm going to react in a way.
Yeah.
Because I had worked for, he wasn't a business coach. He was a marketing consultant, mm-hmm. but he had built up so many businesses and sold them off so many times that, he kind of knew how to give some people advice, but he was such a shady character that he soured me on anybody who was a business coach, a marketing consultant, any of that. Like whenever I went into marketing, I said I was going to the dark side because I don't know, there's just that, I don't know, I guess because there's so many foul players out there, everybody gets a bad rap.
For me, the biggest challenge I had to learn, and that's a challenge with sometimes people that are coming out of a ton of experience into it. The art of coaching is becoming a questionologist. I can be a consultant and I can come in and tell you, like your podcasting. If I was really experienced in podcasting, I could come in and consult you on that. But as a business coach, my job is to come in and help uncover the stuff inside of you and help you bring that out and live out your dreams. And so that was one of the biggest challenges for me, in the ministry world and my previous work experiences. I was always the answer guy. And now I had to learn how to be the question guy. Mm. And I think that's the people that learn that become the coaches that succeed. I was told by a good friend of mine that's another great business coach out of Canada. He's like, it'll probably be about year 5 before you'll really feel like you've found yourself as a coach. And he was right. I just needed that many years to get experience. I told my wife yesterday, I was like, man, I wish I could go back to those first 2 or 3 clients and get a do-over, because I don't know that I really helped them as much as I could have or should have, because it is such a growing learning environment.
Yeah, that's something I'll say. It's very evident in any of the meetings I've sat down with you. It's almost that, you talk about the differences between coaches. It's almost like the same way when I talk about whenever somebody tells me like, oh, you're such a good listener. Mm-hmm. And there is a massive difference between hearing and listening.
True.
And also like when I've sat down in those meetings, not only are you listening, but it seems like you genuinely care.
Yeah.
And that is something that, doctors, like millions of people out there in some sort of service industry, you don't feel that a lot
right.
in life. And so I don't know, when we first started working with you and I was sitting down with you in person, it was like I was finally able to strip all that, the baggage I was bringing into our relationship.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh yeah, this is what it's supposed to feel like. And yeah, it's very similar. I could tell, the way you question people is almost, how I am as a sports writer when I enter into a conversation with an interview subject, and I have all these questions ready to figure out what the true story is.
Right.
An episode I just did a couple weeks ago, I literally had a title written out in my audition file and everything, had a whole list of questions ready for this guy.
Yeah.
And the answer to one of my very first questions, I had to scratch out the entire rest of the pad, change the title and everything. At the end of it, I was like, well, you screwed this all up for me. It's less about the original topic I told you it was about.
Right.
And so I had to ask him for some more time. But how do you identify the right questions to ask somebody?
Good question. There's a book that I love called The Coaching Habit. I encourage anybody, if you're interested in the coaching world, to read that. He talks about some opening questions, and then he says the most powerful question for a coach ever is, and what else? Because the and what else's are going to get you down to the core issue like you were just talking about. A couple years ago when I was working with a firm out of Canada, I went up there, and the Canadian Art Museum, it's kind of like our Smithsonian, but for the Canadians, they had an exhibit on Da Vinci, which I had previously had been to the Louvre in France and had seen the Mona Lisa and all that stuff. And so I was interested in Da Vinci. Man, there's so much to that guy that I didn't realize. But one of the things that I really took away from that visit of the Da Vinci, it was his 500-year anniversary, and they had this huge exhibit. Da Vinci wanted to learn how to paint better. And he wanted to figure out how the cloth laid on an arm. And so he figured the only way he could really understand and how to paint the cloth line on an arm is to really understand the arm. And so he went, and it was against the law then, but he went and got 31 cadavers and began slowly, methodically dissecting the human body. And he's the father of modern medicine, right? I mean, all the pictures that we see of early medicine was from him. He's the very first guy that ever discovered hardening of the arteries because he got in there. And so his art was just peeling one layer at a time and diagramming it, and peel another layer and diagram it, and peel another layer and diagram it. And what I took from that for me in coaching is that when I sit down with a client, I've got to figure out how to start peeling back the layers. If I want to, he wanted to figure out how to paint well. I wanted to help you figure out how to run your business well. So let's start figuring out what's going on. And it's one layer at a time and get down. And they said that he got down to where it was just the bones, and he actually took strings and tied it to the fingers so that he could see how they worked.
Wow.
That, I'll never forget that. It was one of the most impressionable things for me, just to understand that level of curiosity. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably one of my favorite quotes for myself now is just stay curious. Mm-hmm. Stay curious. Keep asking questions. Keep asking, and what else?
Yeah.
Because if you keep doing that, you're eventually going to get down to the core.
Yeah, and the effort that takes, like, to go, like, everything, to go acquire all those when it's illegal, too.
When it was illegal, yeah.
And then, the meticulous process that it must be, because, like...
Yeah. And the thing is, we don't know. I mean, most of us know Da Vinci. We've heard of, the Mona Lisa, the whatever that picture is of the human body in a circle. But man, this guy, he created the very first tank. The reason ships don't sink today is because Da Vinci discovered and created the dual hull of a boat. The guy created musical instruments that were horse-drawn, but the horse had to walk at a certain pace to make the music sound right. Mm. The guy was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And it was that curiosity in him that challenges me.
Going back to the business coach aspect of it, how would you tell somebody to identify a good business coach for them?
Find somebody that Find somebody that's curious, that knows, that you can tell from the beginning they're going to ask questions. They're not going to come in and try to be answer man. The thing about business coaching that's unique is that while we may have niches that we end up finding ourselves in, what I have figured out is that every single organization deals with some of the exact same problems, just at different scales.
Yeah.
I have a client that I've been coaching for 3 or 4 years. I took him with me to start coaching another client that is a larger financial institution here in town. And he went with me for their strategic planning session. And when we walked out of that, he was like, holy cow, man, they have the same problems I do. He's a $1 million company, and they're a $500 million organization, but they have the same set of problems. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is the key: is finding somebody that's going to be curious. When I talk about questionology, I can sit down sometimes with a client, and I know they need to go from A to D, and I could tell them how to go from A to D. But all I am is a guy with a briefcase or a backpack and a Mac computer that, sells my stuff. If I can ask them the questions to help them get from A to D on their own, then they own it. And I think that is what you want in a business coach.
The importance of an outside perspective. I mean, it's a cliche thing that everybody brings up, but sure. I just don't know of anything else that I use more to get things out of my business than bringing someone else in, right, and saying, I need another set of eyes, because I tend to get hyper focused on a current issue or, trying to find a solution for something I'm viewing as a problem. Mm-hmm. And I bring in somebody else, and it's been under my nose the whole time.
I do these, I call them parables. I tell a story of it's called the parable of the pen. One day when I was at Classic Rock working, I was writing some documents, and the owner came and said, hey, would you go with me and to the warehouse and help me with something? And so I left and went to the warehouse, and then we went to another warehouse, and then 45 minutes later, I end up back in my office, and I can't find my pen. It's my favorite pen. It was a Rhapsody pen from the company in Canada, and it wrote really well. I loved that pen. Well, I couldn't find it. And so what are we told to do as kids if we lose something? Retrace our steps. So I went and retraced all my steps and walked back through the building, looked everywhere for another 45 minutes to an hour, and still couldn't find my pen. So now I'm back in my office, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm frustrated. A friend of mine walks by, and he's like, dude, what's with the long face? I said, man, I can't find my pen. And he looked at me and smiled and said, you mean that one right there under your hand? It was under a piece of paper. It had been there the whole time. And all I needed was somebody else with a different perspective at my problem to help me solve it. And that's what I get to do. I get to be the guy that comes in and helps you see your problems from a different perspective. And oftentimes in looking at our problems from a different perspective, then we find the answers that we need or the solutions we're looking for.
Do you remember, it was right around the time I was trying to decide whether to start start freelancing for Gabe and Kylie instead of being a full-time employee and trying to start everything. Do you remember the conversation we had at Travelers and the little diagram you drew out for me?
I remember us meeting. I'm not sure which diagram was it.
It was one, I can't remember what you called it, but it was the one that you shared, I think, with a Missouri State quarterback.
Okay, yeah. So it's the learning circle.
Yeah, the learning circle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I actually got that out of a discipleship book years ago. But I realize it's something I share with almost every single one of my clients now, because it kind of gives you that perspective. You're flying through life, you're cruising through life, and something happens. It's called a kairos moment. It's a moment when time seems to stand still. Mm-hmm. And those moments can either derail us and get us off track, or if we're intentional enough, we can use those moments to learn. And the diagram actually, as you're cruising there and you hit that moment, if you create a circle, one side of the circle says, what do I need to learn? That's your first question, to observe, reflect, and consider, what do I need to learn? And then the next side of the circle says, what's my response? How am I going to respond to what I need to learn? And the cool thing about it is that circle, physics will tell us that circle will create some momentum and help propel us to a higher level than we are already traveling. I have used that with my children. I've used that, like you said, with athletes at Missouri State when I was life coach for this football team. I've used it with business clients. But it's so true. Every one of those mistakes, failures, surprises, catastrophes, whatever that happen in our life, we can either let them derail us or figure out how do we learn from this.
Because up until that point, it looked like every time that I would run into an issue, it looked like a train accident.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
cars are scattered on both sides of the tracks. And I spend God knows how many days cleaning that up and getting back on track instead of just like looking at the, like, what do I need to learn?
Right.
Maybe I should fix the railroad tracks over here
Right.
where I keep derailing.
Yeah.
But I've used that ever since then. Like off and on, I would accidentally use that. You know, we look at sometimes we're in a better mood and we know like, okay, this problem isn't going to change if I just lose my head over it. But instead now I'm much more intentional when I start to feel myself like bubbling up with, you know, either anger or depression over the situation I'm in. I'm like, why do I feel uncomfortable right now?
Right.
And then I accept that it's not going to change, that it could happen again. And so I look at it and I just, you know, I try to write down some of the things. Like I do start off with, what am I supposed to learn here? And I start just writing down possible things that either led to that situation or whatever it may be. And then I start learning it. Like, how do I avoid doing the same thing over and over? Because just a little backstory about this podcast, I want to say probably when I was a sports writer in Waynesville, which I think I've been in Springfield since 2017. So sometime between 2014 and 2017, I had an idea of doing my own thing. You know, I entered the journalism world. And right away, I'm like, oh, they are not doing anything that I was told to do in college. You know, the ethics were different.
Right.
You know, it was not nearly as quote unquote professional as I thought it was about to be. And it was bumping up against some of my values. And, you know, the way that I want to tell a story isn't the way they want to tell a story. You know, we're still finding both sides of the fence and things like that, but I wasn't able to. Right before we started this, I was talking about like I like to put my all into every project, and this was a daily paper who was telling me like, we love your features, we need more of them, and then they're like, but we still need something every day. And I was able to do that, but the quality wasn't what I wanted, and so I started thinking like, I've always been, you call it the big hairy audacious goal, I've always had one. And at that time I was like, oh, it's, you know, the dream of where I want to be is changing. And I decided right then, I was like, my end goal is going to be, I'm going to produce content on my own. Let's see. That would be 7+ years that I've just sat on that goal and not done anything. Every time I would I would throw money at the problem. I'd go buy a piece of equipment and I'm like, oh, I don't have everything I need. And I would do it again. Or come up with, I've even recorded podcasts before and deleted them for whatever reason. And, you know, I'm like, oh, that didn't turn out how I want, and just deleted the whole thing or tore a page out of my book and just threw it away instead of what was the problem with that podcast? Why didn't I want it? And then how do I make it better next time? I would just blow it all up and start all over instead of building that momentum.
I still find myself doing that. I have been playing with the idea of doing a TikTok channel for my business coaching. And I probably have 50 little videos that I've shot to launch my TikTok channel. And it's still not launched. I literally sat in my car in front of Panera the other day and tried to shoot my intro TikTok again. And I think I shot 10 versions of it and didn't like it. And what I feel like is TikTok, most of the videos on there are so casual and conversational and relational, but there's still this thing in me that's got this weird perfectionism that frees me up sometimes, you know? And so, I hear what you're saying.
And I'll chase down the answer to that because I've still never figured it out.
This episode of the Show My Scars podcast is brought to you by Two Oddballs Creative. Aside from their digital marketing services, the Oddballs also offer public and media relations support. The Oddballs have both marketing and media experience, so they can step in and deliver the perfect message in whatever tone and in whatever media that you need. I know what you're thinking. I'm not a shady business owner. I don't have to worry about PR. At least that's what I hope you're thinking. I guess I don't know who's listening out there. But have you ever seen those morning news shows with the person on there talking about their business or showing off some product? The Oddballs have gotten their clients on local stations doing that very thing. Or they can provide community relations through connecting you to the correct volunteer opportunities, local events, and community organizations that align with your business's values, so your local community identifies and believes in those values, thereby building goodwill for your business. So click on over to twooddballs.com or call them at 417-986-6332. That's the number 2, oddballs.com, or 417-986-6332.
What are some of the top things that you think all want-to-be business owners need to figure out before they start chasing after their goals?
That's a good question. I think figure out what your passion is. I worked with a group of auto mechanics yesterday, and we were talking about excellence. You know, perfection is impossible. Excellence, I heard a definition one time that stuck with me. Excellence is doing the very best you can with what you have. And so we were talking about them creating a culture of excellence in their organization. But what I figured out is that passion, if you can discover your passion, that passion will drive you to the excellence, right? And so figure out what you're really passionate about. And understand that no matter what business you start, you're not in the widget business. You're not in the garage door business. You're not in the automotive repair business. You're in the people business. I don't care what you do. Mm-hmm. You're in the people business. And figuring out somewhere your passion's got to come back to a desire to help people. Yeah, part of your driving force, your main purpose of being and existing is to make money so that you can provide for your family. But it's got to go deeper than that. And the deeper than that is always going to be something about people. Mm-hmm. Whether you want to help people deal with mental health challenges, or you want to help people, what I told these guys yesterday, the auto mechanics, I'm like, look, here's at the end of the day, you're in here getting greasy and changing oil and fixing brakes. And if that's all you see, it's going to be tough for you to drive with excellence. Let me tell you what you're really doing. You're making it possible for that single mom to get her kid to school safely. You're making it possible for that guy to drive to his grandpa's funeral and get there safely. You're making it possible for that family to go on a vacation, right? It's to people. And so whatever business you're thinking about doing, the core of it is going to be people. And so that's where I challenge everybody to start. What is what I'm going to do? How is it going to impact people? And let those values shape where you go from there. So that's, for me, my dream early on in life was to influence people. So many years, the vehicle that I used to do that was ministry. At some point, I felt like ministry got a flat tire. And rather than changing the tire, I just got a new vehicle, and it's called business coaching. At the end of the day, I'm still helping people.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I think we ought to realize.
Yeah. Because if on the people that you're helping in that moment, if they feel like that's not coming from you. If that's not your goal, they're going to feel that.
Yeah.
I can't count the number of times that I've gotten a good product, I've gotten good quote unquote service, but I don't return for one reason or the other. And it all boils down to, I'm like, they only cared about the sale.
The dollar. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, there's some people that will continue to go out and support that just because they want the best product or whatever, but not most people.
Right.
They want a good experience too. And the way that you feel after that exchanging of money matters a lot as to whether or not they're going to come back.
Yeah.
During the early goings of starting this podcast and my little marketing side business that I do, I forget how it was put to me one time, but they talked about the stress that you have as a small business owner. And I can't remember exactly how they put it, but essentially they were telling me, if you're getting into this to get away from the worries of your day-to-day job, you're doing the wrong thing, because there comes a lot of stress with this. Yeah. It has been a different stress. I categorize mine as like the fight, flight, or freeze kind of anxiety that I get. And then there's this other anxiety I get that I call motivating. Yeah. Kind of feels the same way internally, but I can say like this is coming from a good place still. How do you manage that yourself, or how do you tell others to manage it?
What you're saying there about the stress or anxiety piling, I think it's possible to take that stress and repurpose it into something that drives you. Even a stress, sometimes you feel like it's a good stress coming. I think you can take even the negative stress, and instead of allowing it to, go back to the learning circle. Instead of allowing it to derail my day, figure out how I can take that stress and use it to propel me, to get me to go in the right direction, right? I feel it all the time. And typically it happens, I'm like any business. In my personal business, things will be going really good. I'll have a good number of clients. Could always use more, but a good number of clients, and it feels like I'm in a good place. And just about the time I get comfortable, I get a client that calls and says, "Hey, I need to pause," or "Hey, I need to take a break," or whatever. And then all of a sudden there's that anxiety again, right? And what I have to do, it's what everybody has to do, is take that anxiety and say, okay, how am I going to use this to push me out of my safe zone to get back into doing the things that I know I need to be doing?
Yeah, because it's almost like, I've said this probably on every episode now, so I probably better stop. But somebody gave me a bit of advice one time, and I kind of repurposed it for myself to help it make sense. But I almost equate to it as like it's one of those Windows error sounds. Like, that person calls and they give you that news, and instead of it just being like that, this is a critical failure, the message is instead like, hey, that means you need to be, looking for clients, in some way, get some more leads. And
I can't really, understand the Windows error sign because I'm a Mac guy, but
for a minute I was like, wait, what did I say wrong? But yeah, it's not something that, you need to resist all the time. And that's what I'm famous for. And then it builds. Anytime I've ever tried to resist the emotions I'm experiencing, instead of letting them flow through me, when I resist and try to cover it up, like, I'm bad. I have to look away from your candy stash over there all the time, because I'm bad when I start getting stressed. I'm like throwing sugar or caffeine at it instead of taking care of it. But yeah, it's to repurpose it and to propel you into something you should be doing.
Something you just said about letting the emotions flow through you, I think that's key, because I think so many people, we've got to have those outlets, right? Somebody that we can talk to, some person that'll help us process those. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to be in the Middle East, in Jordan, which was an amazing experience. Got to go to Petra and all that cool stuff. But we did go spend a day at the Dead Sea. And I've heard about the Dead Sea a lot of my life. But being there and getting in that water and just that experience of the float, because it's dead, right? That's a body of water. The reason it's dead is because it flows in, but nothing flows out of it. And that's what happens to us. If we keep up all these emotions inside of us, it stagnates and creates death of vision, death of purpose, death of our drive, death of our passion. If we don't find a way to let that stuff out.
Yeah.
And I am probably, I take my business now, I take a percentage of all my revenue and it goes into a fund that I use to help pay for mental health support, mental health counseling for clients and friends and anybody that comes along that I meet, because I'm so passionate about people having access to somebody that can help them figure out how to keep all those emotions, the good ones and the bad ones, flowing right.
Yeah. Yeah, because they all have a purpose.
Right.
They're not just there for giggles. But
Right.
Because for so long, I thought the whole point of mental health was to get rid of anxiety or sadness. And instead, now, if I feel like, I'm a big former offensive lineman,
sure,
I still go, like, if I feel sadness now, I go somewhere with it and I literally just will cry.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's something about this. Like, I'm supposed to be doing this.
Yeah.
And so many times either a solution to whatever is bothering me comes up or an explanation at the very least. I understand like the purpose of whatever season it is that I'm going through. And I've started to take those very seriously because of the things that I've been able to derive out of those, seemingly bad, things in our life. But so many people experience work. Like, I used to use this as a way to almost kind of like beat myself up more. But when I think about, like, there's people dealing with worse things than this. Sure. And I had to realize, like, instead of feeling guilty about that, like, well, figure out the lesson that you're supposed to learn from this. And, because they are teachable moments every time. Right. And, when I'm thinking about, with the podcast, like trying to build up the confidence to go do that, I thought that had to come first so many years of my life. Like, the confidence had to come first, because I'm going to have to be able to withstand the terrible comments or the, the lack of listeners or the whatever it is. And somebody along the line, I wish I knew who it was, but somebody was like, you'll never have the confidence without doing it. Right. Because at one point or the other, I thought I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And I believe it was a comedian that told me that. Sure. Because they were like, you're going to be scared every time. Yeah. And, it was Conan O'Brien. He said that every show before he walked out, he was scared. Oh, yeah. And it never went away throughout his whole life. And even now, like this morning on the way here, even though I know you and have seen you a million times over, I got here super early and ran through all my stuff because I was like, the last thing I need is for him to come in here and this doesn't work. I'm like, how dumb would I look? Sure.
I've traveled the world and spoken. Like, literally, I've spoken in Europe. I've spoken in South America. I've spoken in the Middle East. I've traveled the world and spoken. I've spoken in front of 20,000 people. Still to this day, I get nervous. And one of my speaking coaches told me the day that you're not nervous is when you probably need to hang it up, because I know that every time I'm given an opportunity to speak, even now, I was a little nervous coming in today. Even now, the words that we're saying have the power, the potential to change somebody's life. Yeah. We don't know who's going to hear this, right? And it's going to live forever. It's evergreen material. So it's going to be out there. Once you put it out there today in the interwaves, 6 years from now, 10 years from now, somebody could stumble on this by chance or by providence or whatever you want to call it, and hear something that you say or I say that is that spark for them. Yeah. Right? And you can't take that lightly. Yeah, it's a podcast. You and I are sitting in an office that we've spent time in before, but what we're doing now could impact somebody's lives, and that makes me nervous.
Yeah. Yeah, and that feeling that I get, I've started to equate it, something that Conan said. It boils down to that you just care.
Yeah.
That means you still care.
Mhm.
And that's something that, I don't want to lose sight of. So you don't want to bury that anxiety, because you start taking powerful enough drugs to do that.
Yeah.
You might stop caring
Yeah.
altogether. And that's not going to work at that point.
Yeah. We, when I was, kind of a funny story of the nerves of before presentations, when I was with Missouri State football as life and leadership coach, we had a player that every single game he would get himself all worked up and psyched up and do the pregame walk, and the kickoff would happen. And after every kickoff, he had to go find a trash can and throw up. And it was just his routine. But part of it was that he just allowed himself to get so worked up, but he channeled it to where it was on the field. And he was one of those guys that he could, between the whistles, he would rip your head off, but the nicest guy in the world. And I think for me, when I get nervous, I think part of what nerves does for me is makes me make sure that I'm as prepared as I can be.
Yeah.
If I ever just get comfortable that I can walk up and wing it, which I could, I've done it enough. I can pull something out of my back pocket and wing it. And I've had to do that at times. But if I know what I'm speaking about, I'm going to be prepared.
Yeah. How do you deal with, because a lot of what I dealt with in the very beginning was that lack of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned into this disbelief that I was going to be able to reach my goals.
Sure.
How do you deal with that? Or how do you coach people to deal with that?
It depends on how I'm approaching it. Like, I've coached a lot of people in public speaking. And what I try to get people that are going to do any type of public presentation to realize is that people want to hear what you got to say. Right? I mean, I turn it on back on them. I'm like, you go to these meetings and your desire is to hear what they have to say. And if the speaker gets up there and fumbles a word or two, do you laugh at them? You might laugh with them if it's a funny. Mm-hmm. But no, you're like, oh, okay, whatever. So many of us have such a perfectionism towards those things that we feel like we could never do it well enough. And we were just talking a while ago about the TikTok. It's that thing of perfectionism that rides in my brain that keeps me from putting it out there. And what I got to understand and what I got to coach myself is that somebody wants to hear what I have to say.
Yeah.
And you can't let that, we talked about imposter syndrome a while ago. Actually, I'm working with, as a coach, I'm coached. I have a business coach, but I also recently met this lady that I'm calling a business therapist. She's amazing. One of her specialties is imposter syndrome. And I don't deal with it a ton, but it does creep up every once in a while. And she's so good. And what I told her one day, and she literally just redid her logo because of this. I told her that the very first time I talked to her, I felt like she reached, because we were on Zoom. She's up in the Northeast. I feel like she reached through the computer over here, grabbed my heart and held it while it was beating and say, why does it beat like this? And she was able to get me to a point where I dealt with some of those challenges that we were talking about.
That's incredible. When you find the right person that's able to do stuff like that, it literally does feel like during COVID, I had a therapist that I had to meet over Zoom, obviously. And I would tell him stuff like that all the time. Like, I swear you're over here. You're like putting your hands on me.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I told her. Actually, so she laughed at this. So hopefully nobody takes offense to this. I said, I feel like that reached through the computer, grabbed my heart and said, why does it beat like this?
Yeah.
And she said that she was going to get a t-shirt that says, I'm that.
Yeah. Something that I would say too, working with Gabe and Kylie, or when I was a sports writer, and I mean, I got to meet right now the Celtics and gosh, why is it slipping my brain? The Mavericks are playing in the finals.
Mm-hmm.
I've met Jason Tatum when he was in high school, and I've met several NBA, NFL players. Mm-hmm. There is not one person that I've met yet and maybe Tom Brady's this way, but I don't know. There's not one of them that didn't have a smidge of disbelief in themselves.
I read a book, a really good book. I think the title of it is It Takes What It Takes, but it was written by the performance coach of Russell Wilson when he was with the Seahawks. So he was working with him when he won the Super Bowl with the Seahawks. And he would fly in wherever they were. He would fly in on Thursday and spend the entire day Thursday with Russell Wilson, helping him get mentally prepared for the game on Sunday. And their biggest approach to things, they called it a neutral mindset. He said, so many of us have heard people talk about positive speaking. He said, oftentimes positive speaking is just blowing smoke.
Yeah.
We know that a lot of times the positive speaking may or may not work. But what we do know is that negative speaking always works. And so his thing was to live in a neutral mindset and just say, okay, that happened. Now what? It takes what it takes. That happened. How am I going to learn from it? What's my experience? What's my response? And move on. And that was interesting. I too have spent time with several NFL players. And what I find out is that, they all have a little bit of imposter syndrome, but what I find out is that they're all just as real as we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody you meet is just another person just trying their best.
They still have to tie their shoes. They still have to wipe their booty.
Yep.
They still have to brush their teeth, right? They're humans.
Yeah. One of the scariest things that I ever heard, it shattered the glass in my mind at the time, but now it still bothers me a little bit. But something that's helped me is somebody it's very simple, but they said nobody knows what they're doing.
Right.
They're like, everybody's just out there just
trying to figure it out.
Yeah, trying to figure it out. Figure out who they are, what they're wanting to do. It's a constant process that never ends.
Yeah.
And so if you're waiting to quote unquote figure it all out, it's never going to happen.
Right.
I mean, I have had decades of experience editing audio, doing different things, but the technology is always changing. And beyond that, I still will make the dumbest mistakes. Yeah. So you're never going to be perfect. I've had to, just a week ago, I had to reach out to tell somebody I wasted 2 of their hours because my audio came out. There was interference in it. Or I was at a client's place and it was just a rough morning and we sat there for probably 15 minutes while I was trying to figure out why the microphone setup that I do not touch in between meeting him is not working. And all it was I had plugged the headphones into the mic and the mic into the headphone slot. Yeah. And I had reset the Bluetooth, all of it. There's always going to, Tom Brady still had interceptions.
Heck yeah.
Tom Brady lost Super Bowls.
Heck yeah.
Against teams that he probably shouldn't have lost Super Bowls to.
One of my favorite quotes that I saw on a doctor's office, it was a Michael Jordan quote. And he lists all of the missed shots. He lists all the fouls that he's had. He lists all these things, all the mistakes that happen. He says, but at the end of the day, so many number of times I was chosen to make the winning shot. Right. And that statement, that thought of mine has been there, that somebody like a Michael Jordan, who when I was growing up, he was the king of everything, sports wise anyway. And you just don't think about all the missed shots he had, all the fouls that he had, but he turned those into the positive.
Yeah. We think of him like he literally has a play called The Shot.
Yeah.
That we still talk about. I'm, wearing his shoes right now. And I barely remember like when I think the memory that I have of him most is his second retirement speech. That I can physically think back about. I can remember all the plays because I've seen them on YouTube a million times over, but the one that I can be like, I remember where I was and everything was his second retirement speech. Yeah. That's all I remember. Yeah. And so, the mistakes that we make, that client still told somebody that they should use me to be their audio engineer.
When you started talking a while ago about the problem, the person whose hours you wasted, back last August, my grandmother turned 100 and we had a big 100th birthday party celebration for her, and family came in from all over the country to be there. And we hired a photographer to take pictures and everything. And about 2 weeks after the event, she reaches out and says, I don't have any pictures. It was my grandmother's 100th birthday. But her disc was corrupted that was in her camera.
Oh my gosh.
No pictures. You know, while I was disappointed, I can't imagine how she felt.
Yeah.
But that's where my mind goes. I was like, oh, don't worry. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Because I know where her mind is. I know that she is just devastated that she destroyed our holiday. She didn't ruin it. We had a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have some pictures, but at the end of the day, but that's that feeling you were talking about.
Yeah. Early on, we were talking about, finding that passion that you want to go after. I remember when I was in high school, about to graduate, it hit me. I was like, I have no idea what I want to do. At the time, I was able to figure it out. I feel super lucky that I remember sitting, at the time I was taking dual credit classes at OTC. I thought I wanted to be an auto mechanic. Always had a thing for cars and all this, but I realized my second year of doing classes there, I was like, I'm starting to fall way behind. It's not clicking for me. I don't know why. At some point it came down to, I was subconsciously, I was seeing a lot of things that I wasn't going to be able to do. And I remember I went and hid from my teacher and I'd finished up my work real early and we were supposed to help out. And I ran and snuck into the back of a van and I laid down and was literally just to have a time to mind wander and think, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Because my football season was about to be up. It was about to get to the nitty gritty of going out and looking at colleges and stuff. And for me, it came to me during that time that, oh, you love sports. You enjoy, I hated my English teacher, but I realized I had a love for storytelling. And so I came to a conclusion of, I want to go be a sports analyst of some sort.
Sure.
Well, I guess this would be a good story to tell, is like after I moved back here and knew I could no longer be a sports writer for various family reasons and things, I didn't know what to do with the rest of my life. Like I just had enough experience and knowledge at the time through therapy and other things of how to boil down to like, okay, your dream you said was sports writing. It's really storytelling. Right. I was able to boil it down to that. But for others who maybe haven't been able to identify that passion,
right?
How do you do that?
So that's a really good question. It could take a lot of time. When I was doing college campus ministry on university campuses back then, and I don't know if it's changed, but back then the average college student changed their major 6 times.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know what the stats are today. What I do know is that the majority of people are not working in what their college degree was in.
Yeah.
They're working in some other field. So that tells me that as much as we can try to figure it out when we're in that age of 20 to 25, there's a lot going to change. If you would ask me when I was in my early 20s, if I would ever be a business coach and do what I do, I'd be like, no. Back then I thought ministry was my thing. And then what I try to tell my children now is figure out something you're going to do and put your all into it until something else reveals that that's the direction. But just make sure whatever you're doing, you're putting everything in. I have a son that's 20 years old. He was one of the youngest firefighters ever hired at the age of 18 in Springfield.
Wow.
Or he's at Republic. No, he's not. Excuse me. He's in Battlefield. But he decided he wanted to be a firefighter, and he was just driven to it. And he went and did a ride along with the fire department one night, came home that night. His hair was down to his shoulders. He shaved his head that night so that the next day he could go turn in his resume.
Wow.
And he turned in his resume, and the very first interview, they said, we normally don't hire people your age, but we're impressed with you, so we'll let you go to the next interview. And I don't know how many people was in the series of interviews, but at the end of the day, it was him and 7 other people made it through. And the chief said, I don't know why we're doing this, but we like you. And they hired him. My other son is still trying to figure out what he wants to do. His twin brother, he thinks he wants to be an animal behavioral scientist, whatever that is. But it's what I just keep telling them is make a decision, go in the direction with all in until you know there's a different direction you're supposed to go. Because I look back at my life, I'm 58 now, and man, I've been a lot of things.
Yeah.
I've been a lot of things. And it's been rewarding. One of the other things I keep telling my children is like, look, the thing you're stressed about right now is literally just a dot in the big picture of your life. I know it's important right now, and I know it's consuming you with anxiety and stress and uncertainty. But if you can give yourself a little bit of room to breathe and pull back and understand that it's just, if life was a yardstick, what you're looking at right now is just one line.
Yeah, there's numerous times I thought a mistake I had made or a decision that I'd made that, maybe in the grand scheme of things isn't a mistake, but I knew I'd made the wrong decision. The amount of times I thought that's going to impact the rest of my life. Yeah. And today it hasn't.
Yeah.
Like there's very few things when I look back and I look at pivotal moments and a mistake that had happened that impact me today.
Sure.
There's probably one. That's my divorce.
Yeah.
And it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be either.
Sure.
So yeah, that's something that I've heard a million times over that I tell everyone. When I see them in just absolute dire straits, one of the first things out of my mouth is, this is not permanent.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've had other people have to remind me of that. Trust me, that never goes away.
Yeah.
But at some point realize this is not permanent. Everything changes. And all you can do is the same thing we've been talking about the whole episode. What do I learn from this? How do I, but it's interesting when you talk, when you're talking about your son and the animal behavior, what the advice that you give him. Gabe has said to me once, and I've used it so many times since then. We were talking about, making decisions on, what we're passionate about and what to do with those passions. He talked about it almost like a cone of like awareness or direction. I'm sorry. A cone of direction. He's like, just head in that direction. Yeah. And yes, put your all behind it, because the number of dumb jobs that I've had when I was going through college or whatever, I was at, I forget what they call it now, but at the time it was owned by Ken Meyer, Meyer Communications. I was doing overnight. And I would do broadcasts for the Springfield Cardinals. It was literally sliding a volume thing up and down and pressing a button to start the commercials. But I went into other studios and played with that audio equipment when there was nothing else going on. And now I know audio engineering.
Yeah.
I took maybe one college class, and that teacher gave everybody A's because he quit at the end of the semester. I learned practically nothing from that.
My dad used to say this. Of course, he was a pastor, and so everything had a spiritual connotation to it. But he was like, if you're asked and given the job of watching the pilot light and making sure it doesn't go out, give it everything you've got. And I look back, and every job, I hauled hay when I was younger on my grandparents' farm. I gave it my everything. I picked blueberries at a blueberry farm. I planted sweet potatoes. I drove for Domino's. Everything I've done, I can honestly look back and say, I feel like I gave it everything, right? It's a character thing. And what I know is that providence, karma, whatever you want to call it, it's going to come around.
Yeah.
If you are the type of person that gives it your all, whatever's in front of you, just give it your all, then I think the good opportunities will be coming.
The last question I have for you, when you're looking, because I think in my life, then the biggest impacts that have happened in my life come down to some of the people that I've learned from. Yeah. And staying in touch with them, keeping eyes on what they do and things like that, because everybody needs a mentor.
Sure.
how do you identify good ones?
Yeah. So that's a really, really good question. I've got a friend who is a mentor from afar, and he and I have spent a lot of time together in the past. And just a couple of weeks ago, I had a chance to reconnect with him. But Tim Elmore is his name, Dr. Tim Elmore. He's an author. He's written some great books. But Dr. Tim used to do this thing, and I modeled it for several years. Each year, he would pick 3, 4, or 5 people that could mentor him in an area of life that he knew he needed development in. And he would go to them and say, I'm going to ask you to be my mentor for a year. Meet with me once a month for lunch or breakfast. I'm buying. And just come ready to answer my questions. And he would pick 4 or 5 guys, women, whoever, and they would have that relationship for a year. And then every year he would end that by inviting all of them to dinner and getting up and telling them what they had taught him that year.
My gosh, I love that.
Much. It's huge. I did it for several years. I never got up to 5. I would usually have 3 or 4. But it would be people that to this day I can reach back out. Like I know that if I need to talk to Dr. Tim Elmore, I can call him. Right? I hadn't talked to him when I saw him 3 weeks ago. I hadn't talked to him in 5, 6 years. But we sit down and it was just like we'd always been talking, right? We established that relationship. I look for people for me that I'm going to. I've got mentors that I connect with regularly. I've got what I call mentors from afar, that I read their books, I watch all their videos, I consume their content, and it helps shape me, right? I've got a couple specific authors. I mentioned Patrick Lencioni earlier when you and I were talking about something. He's one of my favorites. I've never met the man, but I would consider him a mentor from afar. But then there's people like Dr. Elmore, or some people probably heard of Dr. John Maxwell. I've had an opportunity to be around Dr. John Maxwell several times, and those are people that have influenced my life greatly. And then I look for people that are close by, that just. And here's what I figured out: is used to be for me a mentor was somebody that was older and wiser. I've got mentors now that are younger than me.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. In some ways, Gabriel is a mentor to me.
Yep. Right.
Kylie is a mentor to me in some ways. I'm anybody that can help me understand something better. Man, I'm going to accept that.
Yeah. Everybody has something you can learn.
Yeah.
If they're if they're an adult.
John Maxwell, and he's not the only one that says this, but he's one of the first people I heard say it. He's like, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah. And I also love the one that the quietest person in the room, because there's a lot of loud individuals out there claiming, like probably proclaiming themselves as mentors. And usually those aren't the ones.
I'll tell you, John Maxwell, the thing that he probably mentored me on the most, and it's changed my life in a lot of ways. I was in a meeting, there was just a few of us there, and John was explaining that when he walks into a room, everybody that's in that room starts with the number 10 on their forehead. They're a 10. And they have to do something to become a 9. Right? Where I know a lot of people, then they walk into a room, everybody starts at a 0. And you've got to do something to impress me to get to a 1.
Right.
But John has this mentality, and I think I've lived it out, that everybody I meet, when I meet you, you start at a 10. I'm going to assume noble intent. Noble.
There you
intent.
go.
I'm going to assume noble intent with everybody that I meet. Has it hurt me before? Yeah. Has it bit me in the ass? Yeah. Have I been taken advantage of? Yeah. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I'd rather start with everybody at a 10 because of what it allows to happen in our relationships.
Yeah, that's great. Because, I mean, not because I think I'm all that or I know more.
Sure.
I think social anxiety, I go in, and it's not that everyone's a 0. It's that I don't know what number's on their head, but it's a scary one.
Yeah.
One way or the other. Yeah. But, to go in, I think thinking of them, as all 10s, I think maybe it's a fear thing.
Yeah.
And if I put them at a 10 and assume noble intent, then they're much more approachable.
Yeah.
Because that's my issue when I go into a room. It happened to me on a podcast the other day. I completely lost my words because I was fangirling on the other side of the screen. I had to tell him, I'm like, dude, I'm super sorry. This is why it's not live, like because of me, not because of something you're gonna say.
Right.
But yeah, I started talking to him, and mid sentence, my brain was just like, dude, you're on this podcast with Big Dave, and I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, I am, and I lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
But literally anybody I've met, from one instance that I've met them or several times over, it's amazing how many days I've gone learning something new in a day just because of a relationship I have. And so I have always felt, especially the first time I took an internship, I was like, this is how I learn.
Yeah. Through
seeing someone else who was just a few steps ahead of me or one step. We talked earlier about, a fellow podcaster I know, and we just called each other. One day she was getting her oil changed, and while she was getting her oil changed, we were just tossing back and forth ideas. What do you think about this? And yeah, we're both starting off pretty much. Maybe she's farther along than I know, but maybe she's just so humble. I assume she just started, but yeah, because I always have said, as a journalist, I always said everyone has a story. Well, everyone can also be a mentor as long as they're trying their hardest every day.
Yeah. I think, what I encourage everybody to do is have a mentor and have a mentee. Always be looking for somebody that you can look up to and receive from. But back to that idea of stuff always flowing through us, not becoming a Dead Sea. We talked about it emotionally. But I think when it comes to leadership or any of this, if I've got a mentor and I've got a mentee, then I'm always learning, because I'm either learning from this person or I'm trying to make sure that I can pass on something important to this person, which drives me to learn more.
Noble, I really appreciate you doing this with me. I had a blast.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited for you. I know I've heard you talk about doing this for a long time, and listened to your first couple, and excited for the journey, man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, go to, was it Talk to Noble,
the
number
Talk
2?
to the number 2 Noble. TalkToNoble.com is my website.
Yeah. Anything else that you got to plug?
I just say, no, not as far as plugging anything. I just say stay curious. Stay curious. Yeah. Curiosity kills a cat, but I think it grows us as humans.
There you go. I like that.